the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, the Speaker of the National Assembly,
there will now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Please be seated. Honorable members and guests, the presiding officers have called a joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces in terms of Joint Rule 7.2 in order to pay tribute to Dr. Frene Ginwala, former Speaker of the National Assembly. I will therefore take this opportunity at this point in time to recognize the presence of Dr. Ginwala's family in our midst. Thank you very much for being with us. We are honored to have you here today. Honorable members, before we start with the tributes, we will perform a candle lighting ceremony here on the stage and the signing of the condolence book. I now invite leaders of political parties and the Chief Whip of Council to join the presiding officers on stage. So business will now be suspended. The candles, sir.
Namanzi.
Will you remember, please rise for the resumption of the House.
Thank you very much, honorable members. Please be seated. We'll now resume with the business and proceed with the tributes. I now invite Honorable the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Honorable Naledi Pando.
Madam Speaker, Deputy Speaker, Chief Whip of the Majority Party, honorable members, the family and colleagues of Dr. Frene Ginwala. It is a privilege and deeply held honor to have the opportunity to contribute to this important sitting celebrating the life of a great South African. Dr. Frene Ginwala was a leader of many accomplishments. She is renowned as a courageous freedom fighter who fearlessly committed herself to the just cause for justice and an end to apartheid. In this role, Comrade Frene, as I called her, fully associated herself with the downtrodden, the marginalized, and the vulnerable. She was also extensively educated and well-read, having obtained qualifications at esteemed global higher education institutions, training in journalism and the law. Honorable members, Madam Speaker, Honorable Chairperson, each year we as South Africans enjoy the privilege of celebrating the brave women of 1956, who boldly marched on the Union buildings to demand an end to apartheid oppressive laws. Comrade Frene is of this character of women, in that, as a very young activist of the 60s, she was already underground, organizing safe houses for our leaders and cadres, and working closely with President O.R. Tambo in exile, creating ANC offices and communications channels for the underground. It was rare, honorable members, for women to take up the study of the law at her time. I believe this choice signaled her instinctive understanding that the practice of law is deeply linked to the enjoyment of freedom and justice. I recall conversations we had about post-apartheid South Africa's emerging jurisprudence and her concern that as constitution writers, we perhaps had not been insightful in that we crafted the Constitution in a manner that assumed a progressive judiciary that would establish precedents that would advance the progressive intentions of the Constitution. She thought that we may have had too much faith in a sector trained in a common philosophy and not always imbued with a desire to advance transformation. She regretted that the ilk of Justice Muhammad and Justice Chalskerson were not with us long enough to wield this influence. These were intriguing discussions in which I learned much, and sadly, we never fully concluded them. I believe Comrade Frene came fully into her own when she was nominated as our ANC candidate for National Assembly Speaker of the first democratically elected parliament. When she ascended to the Assembly chair after the vote, I think all of us present in that May of 1994 knew that a new era had begun for South Africa, and knew that that new age would have the authoritative stamp of Dr. Ginwala on it. Speaker Ginwala shaped the democratic character of our parliament, supported by several members of parliament, old and new. Reverend Arnold Stofile, our first majority party chief whip. Yanni Momberg, our program whip. Douglas Gibson, chief whip of the opposition. Ken Andrew, erudite in understanding law. And the inimitable Mr. van der Merwe of the IFP, as well as the hardworking and close friend to Comrade Frene, Deputy Speaker Baleka Mbete. What a team we had. Speaker was determined at that early time that this parliament would be an open, accessible parliament of the people. Open committees, questions to the executive, informative debate, and reminders to all of us often that we are all in this together. The MAPS project, we referred to it fondly in that way, which she brilliantly steered with the title Perspectives of and on Africa, was an amazing initiative designed to encourage often fractiously divided members that it was possible to look at issues from different perspectives and sometimes even shared perspectives, not bound by where we sit, but by what they represent, and not drawn just from the viewpoint of our subjective political and social experiences. Through intellectual scrutiny of our engagement with the task of transformation, she encouraged us to think anew. And many new unifying conversations were begun. I remember once she was walking along the parliamentary corridor just outside the old assembly chamber, and the Honorable Tony Leon and her got into the subject of the map and perspectives. And the discussion began to get rather heated until she explained to the Honorable Leon that, you see, what is happening is what I'm trying to discourage. You have a perspective, I have a perspective, and I'm saying, could we try to find the unity that may exist somewhere in between? Her work in the United Nations, in the Special Task Team on Human Security, gave shape and content to the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. She was erudite in her conceptualization of the meaning of human security and sought to encourage us to understand that for sustainable development, all areas of socioeconomic endeavor had to be addressed, and that attention to only one would not provide the true human security that humanity deserves. In Parliament, she played a key role in overhauling archaic rules, from firmly assisting members to transition to saying, Madam Speaker, after decades of the old Mr. Speaker apartheid conversations. I cannot forget the honorable member who would come to the podium and begin his speech, Mr. Speaker, very boldly. And Honorable Ginwala would say, Honorable Member, it's Madam Speaker. And the honorable member would almost close his eyes and grit his teeth to remember and begin his speech again and say, Mr. Speaker. After many lessons, he did learn to get it right. She also was able to get former antagonists to shake hands. She stood out in that she respected all political parties, and whether majority or opposition, you had a voice in her chamber. She continued to be an internationalist, serving the United Nations, helping to form and steer TICAD, which still exists up to today, and drafting with aplomb the Pan-African Parliament Protocol, along with another stalwart, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and serving as an inaugural member of that key institution. I told the story at her memorial service that when we were working on the draft protocol of the Pan-African Parliament, certain of the leaders of the African continent were not happy with the direction the protocol was taking and felt that this looked like too radical a protocol than what they would want to see an African Parliament consist of. So Dr. Ginwala, as the lead in the crafters, was summoned to a meeting. Off she went. And she came back hours later, and we continued to draft what we thought needed to be in the protocol of a Pan-African Parliament. And I think if it wasn't Frene Ginwala, we wouldn't have the content of the protocol that we have today. Honorable members, Comrade Frene Ginwala was a truly incredible, well-rounded leader who leaves an indelible mark on the history of post-apartheid South Africa. I must conclude by telling you that sometimes we would conjoin in intimidating some of the staff of Parliament, and we had an arrangement of seating in her office where someone was coming in who we needed to really scare. We would sit in a particular way, and we had a manner of who starts and who continues the discussion. After some time, the staff had learned that this sitting pattern was an intimidating one, and they would enter the office rubbing their hands, knowing that the grill was about to begin. Dear Comrade Ginwala, thank you for your service to our nation. Thank you for your contribution to transformation. May you rest in peace. Lala ngxolo, Kabane. I thank you, honorable member.
Thank you very much, Minister. We now proceed to the Honorable, the Chief Whip of the Opposition, Honorable Kwakube.
I think, Minister, it is really apt that I get to greet this afternoon by stating, good afternoon, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the Democratic Alliance and formally, we would like to formally extend our deepest condolences to the friends, to the family of Dr. Frene Ginwala, to her political party, the African National Congress, and to all those whose lives were touched by her work over the course of a well-lived life. Siyavelana nani, siyayazi into yobana umthi omkhulu uwile. The death of the first speaker of the first democratic parliament comes at a seminal time in our country, and indeed for this institution too. The angst and despair and anger among South Africans is palpable. This country-wide anxiety about the future coincides with the deaths of some of our founding figures of our democracy, a symbolism we can't ignore. It does require leaders of today in South Africa to recommit themselves in word and deed to the very promise of 1994. It requires us to interrogate what legacy has been left behind by people like Dr. Ginwala and how best we can carry the path they have charted for us all. The life of this formidable feminist, academic, freedom fighter, a trailblazer has made me, a young leader in South Africa, pause for thought about the role that we are all playing in bettering the lives of people who elected us to serve them. Are we building on the gains of people like Dr. Ginwala so that their life's work and sacrifices are not in vain? Or have we abandoned the hope and the commitment of 1994? Many have spoken, including our previous speaker, about the gravity of the moment when the first democratic parliament was founded. She herself spoke of the importance of this institution in changing lives. It was an institution that was built on a foundation of a racially segregated South Africa, a country that many had written off, pointing to examples across the continent. However, many committed themselves to building a democratic South Africa where the color of your skin does not determine your lot in life. Parliament as an institution was critical to that national project. It was in that house that laws were passed that would go on to give effect to our constitution, a document that is lauded world over. Dr. Ginwala began her work of establishing the culture, the rules, the procedures of Parliament, working from a completely blank slate. But from the work that was done then, we now know the impact and what an effective Parliament ought to do. It elects a president, it passes laws, it holds the executive to account, and it provides a platform for issues affecting South Africans to be ventilated. Lo msebenzi siwenza apha namhlanje siuhlakulelwe ngabantu abafana no Dr. Ginwala. In preparing for this tribute, it was important that I not limit my preparation on only what was written about Dr. Ginwala, but to speak to people who served in Parliament during her time as a Speaker of the National Assembly. I spoke to James Self, who has since retired, but spoke warmly about Dr. Ginwala. He too was part of that historic class of 1994. Someone who differed with the Speaker politically, but had immense respect for her work and her commitment to the institution. He recalled to me how fair she was, how in spite of her political persuasion, it never clouded her judgment when it came to institutional discipline in the House. He recalled in detail how detail-orientated she was, how committed she was to the spirit and the letter of the rules of the National Assembly and of Parliament as a whole. He spoke of how her work as the inaugural presiding officer has truly deepened South Africa's democracy. This is no doubt an incredible legacy. And so now, honorable members, the responsibility is ours. We need to restore this parliament to the standard and the caliber of that very first parliament. If we are to honor the life of Dr. Ginwala, we must rebuild parliament. We need to make sure that the rubble, which was once the house that changed the course of South Africa as we know it, is rebuilt without further delay. We need to make sure that the contribution of the first Speaker of Parliament is recorded in Parliament that will be rebuilt, similar to the Mandela bust that stands proudly in front of the Assembly. Honoring her work cannot just be in the form of memorial material. It needs to be reflected in how we treat this House. We need presiding officers who will commit to the rules of the institution, unmoved by their own political affiliation. We need to bring back the spirit of working across party lines. South Africans need to see us and in our commitment to bringing change in their lives. We need to abandon the unprogressive tendency of shooting down ideas because they do not come from our own political party. The issues facing South Africans are urgent and they require the kind of political maturity that the likes of Dr. Ginwala had. And so, as we bid farewell to her, we also express our deep gratitude. Silapha namhlanje, sineparlamente enemithetho nemiqathango, yimisebenzi yabantu abafana no Dr. Ginwala. Angangaphumla ngoxolo, ugqatso ulufezile. SingumZantsi Afrika, siyabulela. Thank you for your service, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is going to be Honorable Ntlangwini.
Thank you very much, Chair of the NCOP. Greetings to the Commander-in-Chief, Julius Malema, to all fearless ground forces of the July movement that is turning 10 years this year. Speaker, on the behalf of the economic freedom fighters, we wish to extend our deepest sympathy and condolences to the family of Dr. Ginwala, our very first Speaker of Parliament. I also wish to extend condolences to the family on behalf of the millions of women in this country and on the continent who were inspired by the example and character of Dr. Ginwala. We assumed the role as head of this august institution when it was not common for a woman to occupy such position of authority in this country and on the continent. Through her unquestionable integrity, a rock-solid commitment to ethical governance, her intellectual depth, her fairness as Speaker of Parliament, Dr. Ginwala provided all of us with a lifetime of examples of what a true servant of leadership all of us should be. She could have chosen to be anything in life, but she chosen to dedicate her entire being to the freedom of our people. When she completed her Bachelor's of Laws degrees at the University of London, she completed her legal training. She could have easily secured a prosperous legal career for herself. However, Dr. Ginwala was repulsed by the apartheid inequalities, the inhumanity with which whites treated blacks in this country enraged her, and she decided to commit her entire life to the freedom of our people. When she worked as head of research in the office of the president of the ANC, Dr. Ginwala focused her research on the transfer of military and nuclear technology, because she envisaged a country which would not need legal arms to stamp authority in the world. She envisaged a country whose might would be sheer force of its moral character, with leadership that did not lie to its people, that did not steal from its people, that would be obsessed with the development of its people as a whole. The uprooting of poverty and the removal of structural independence that will hold back the development of our people, particularly the black majority in the country. As we celebrate her lifetime commitment to freedom, we must acknowledge that her last days might surely have been hurt by observing the directions her political party is taking. She must have never foreseen in her lifetime that the party she belonged to would have had a president accused of gross violation of the Constitution, a president who illicitly hid foreign currency under his mattresses, his private resident violating the handling of foreign currency in this country. She might have not foreseen the same president will stand accused of using state resources to hunt down those who rob the foreign currencies from his farm, enlist the services of Namibian head of state to search for the criminals after finally catching them, to bribe the so-called criminals to not even mention that the crime was ever committed. Most painfully, in memory of Dr. Ginwala, would have been seeing the role under the current speaker that she's playing in defying the recommendations of the committee that Parliament, she herself have set up, which recommendations that was prima facie evidence case against Mr. Ramaphosa to answer relating to the crimes that was committed at his farms. When Parliament shield a potential criminal on the basis of party loyalty, as you are screaming, Dr. Ginwala must have felt the soul pierced by the criminality that engulfed her own political party. We remember her because of the example she has set on how this parliament and how this democracy of South Africa should be led. In our efforts to hold the executive to account, Lindiwe Zulu, we do so because she taught all of us the laws that must be respected, that Parliament must have teeth to hold the executive to account. We will not allow criminals and those who defend criminality to endanger our democracy, Honorable Lindiwe Zulu. We will keep her memory alive by doing all we can to prevent Parliament to become a toothless entity by a group of criminals who majority to spit on the Constitution. May her soul rest in peace and her family be comforted. Honorable Zulu, I'm turning 40 here. She was one of my role models, in case you don't know. And the EFF is turning 10, whether you like it or not. We will be part of this house. That what you are doing might have pained Dr. Ginwala. We wish to send our heartfelt condolences to the family, and we will forever learn from the ones that have came before us to hold
And
you
your time
to
is up,
account.
honorable member.
I thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Honorable Singh. Honorable Singh.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Honorable Speaker, His Excellency the President in absentia, Honorable Ministers and Honorable colleagues. I deem it a singular honor this afternoon to have been asked to pay tribute to a great South African patriot, somebody that I worked with in 1994 when I joined the Senate. And although I was senator then, we met very often in the Constitutional Assembly under her leadership. I also remember personally going on the first South African parliamentary trip to the Parliament of India in 1995, led by Speaker Frene Ginwala. And that is where we saw the other side of Speaker Frene Ginwala, the friendly side, the motherly side, and the side where she even scolded us when after long day sessions, we used to have certain spiritual sessions in our room and get delayed for our evening meetings. That was Honorable Speaker Frene Ginwala. I deem it an honor to read this tribute on behalf of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who served this parliament and this country from 1994 and who served with Speaker Frene Ginwala. And I read his tribute. Before I pay tribute to our country's first speaker of a democratically elected parliament, allow me to express my condolences to her family. As you listen to our praises being poured out for your aunt, I pray it will be a healing balm. Thank you for sharing Dr. Frene Ginwala with the country she loved so much. By the time we convened our first democratic parliament on 9th May 1994, Dr. Ginwala had already earned the respect of every party that stepped into the government of national unity. Already she had lived a remarkable life. Already she had a formidable library of academic achievements. Already she had served South Africa with every fiber of her being. For the sake of our liberation, she had spent 30 years away from the soil in which her heart was planted. We in the liberation movement held her in high regard. We knew the role she played in exposing apartheid's worst aberrations to the world, and an equally valuable role in communicating the ideas of our movement. When Inkatha disagreed with the call for international sanctions against South Africa, I found Dr. Ginwala an articulate and informed adversary. She was the ANC spokesperson on sanctions in the United Kingdom at the same time that I was visiting heads of state like Prime Minister Thatcher, President Reagan, Chancellor Kohl, and Prime Minister Ale, persuading them against disinvestment. When we achieved democracy, it was natural that Dr. Ginwala played a central role. Her appointment as Speaker of the National Assembly augured well for our first Parliament. She played the role as it was meant to be played with dignity, impartiality, and firmness. Undoubtedly, there was greater decorum in Parliament at that time, but that is not to say that her patience was not tested. Within the first 10 years of democracy, some 700 major pieces of legislation were passed. My own Immigration Act passed with Honorable Ginwala presiding, and it was no easy task to transform the entire body of law in our country so swiftly, and yet that is what was demanded of her. For the first 2 years, Parliament also doubled as a constitutional assembly, in which the Honorable Ginwala made her great contribution to crafting South Africa's final constitution. She was an astute negotiator. The IFP had 48 members in the Constitutional Assembly, and we produced a full analysis of what we felt was needed, evaluating the alternatives and explaining why our options were preferable. I am honored to have served, says Prince Buthelezi, our country with such a dedicated patriot. May she rest in eternal peace. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now proceed to Honorable W. Wessels.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Chairperson Dr. Frene Ginwala was a true Democrat. She stood up for what she believed in, and she had such character and such courage. As the first Speaker of the Democratic National Assembly, she actively promoted true multi-party participation and democracy. She also actively contributed to establish the South African Parliament as a parliament of the people and promoted true public participation. She possessed the much-needed qualities as Speaker, and she had the gravitas to ensure that there was respect and discipline from all sides of the House in the National Assembly. And she protected the decorum of the House. She believed that human rights should not only be codified in the Constitution, but should be delivered on. What she stood for and what she promoted, in particular the values of respect, fairness, and true democracy, we should learn from, and we should evaluate, Honourable Chairperson, if those values are still present in this institution today. Is it still being promoted and respected? She respected the voices of minorities. Voorsitter, ek het nie soos die agbare Singh wat voor my gepraat het, die agbare Ginwala persoonlik geken. Maar ek het haar leer ken deur om televisie te kyk. Daai tyd was ek so 9, 10 jaar oud en dit was regstreeks uitgesaai. En dit is terwyl ek gemaak het asof ek huiswerk doen. I made as if I was doing homework. I pretended I was doing homework and I watched Parliament on television at that stage. And I saw the Speaker Ginwala in action. I saw those values and it enticed me, that first democratic parliament, to become involved in politics. I think we should all learn and honor her memory by respecting those values, the values of multi-party participation in this institution, promoting real public participation, not only making public participation a rubber stamp or something we go through, something that stands in the Constitution and the rules of this institution, but actually listening to the people, actually listening to what people need and delivering on what we say human rights and basic rights are. Let's honor Speaker Ginwala's memory. On behalf of the FF+, I express our sincere condolences with her family, her friends, and her former colleagues. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is going to be the House Honorable A.J. Nyambi, the House Chairperson of the NCOP.
Honorable Speaker, Honorable Chairperson, Ginwala family, honorable members, esteemed guests. Indeed, Honorable Pando, it's an honor and a humbling experience to be part of the speakers when honoring a stalwart that lived her life to the fullest. To the Ginwala family, we are saying it will be bad for us to take this opportunity and try to educate those that don't have a sense of occasion. It will be remiss of me if I did not join the hordes of many South Africans, both at home and in the diaspora, in congratulating the trio, Nomcebo Zigote, Walter Koneman, Zakes Bantwini, for winning a Grammy Award last night. Annexing the Best Global Music Performance Award is not a small feat. It reminds us of our innate ability to achieve the highest level as a country. Congratulations to the trio. The announcement of their exploits could not have come at a better time. It is a perfect tribute to the life and times of Dr. Frene Ginwala, who defied obscurity and mediocrity. Her life and ultimate demise remind us of what it means to be of service to one's people, and her departure emphasizes the fact that we have one chance to live and to create a legacy that will be subject of both scholarly research and casual debates. In her death, Dr. Ginwala joins an array of political luminaries such as Charlotte Maxeke, Lillian Ngoyi, Florence Maposho, Nomzamo Madikizela Mandela, Ruth First, Albertina Sisulu, Noma Kampegi, and many matriarchs who made a name for themselves in the trenches and battle lines in the fight against apartheid. We hear their voices of discontent in the rumbling thunders of Highveld, and we hear their lamentation in the wielding winds of Cape. We also hear their happy song in the fluttering footsteps of thousands of our learners and students storming schools and universities to carve a future for themselves. Lesingakusho kubo ukuthi lalani ngekuthula maqhawe kade akithi. Sine sitawuqhubeka sizabalaze kuze kufike ilanga lapho iningizimu Afrika itawuba ikhululekile ngetemnotho njengobe yakhululeka ngetembangave. Sitawenda siqiniseko sekuthi akekho lo msikathi lotawudlengulwa ashaywe aphindze abulawe. Ngeke nangale kwaloko sitawutibophelela ukuthi tonke tifundziso tenu titawuba sibani endleleni yethu yekuphila nasekuphatseni live leningizimu Afrika. We mourn the passing of Mam Frene because there will never be another like her. Yet we celebrate her life because of many years of service she gave to us in the fight to eradicate the three-headed dragon of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. Mama Frene joined the struggle when it was not fashionable to do so. She could so easily have been stuck in a successful career for a gifted journalist, an author, an academic that she was, but she opted for the trenches. The colorful speeches and rendition we have made since the sad news of her passing broke are befitting of the noble matriarch. However, they do not make up for the life of a hardship she enjoyed. Just like the biblical Moses, she ditched the trappings of glittering life in reality and instead chose to fight alongside her people for a just and equitable society. She skipped the comfort of her motherland, hopping from country to country with a bowl-sitting solidarity for a just cause. She chose a life of servitude when she could have been a queen in her living years. Mam Frene hated sexism and non-racialism with passion and devoted her life fighting against injustice. Any tale being told about the history of our revolution, which does not feature Mam Frene as one of the main protagonists, will be downtrodden, incomplete, and demeaning of her contribution. Her love of the country went beyond her political colors, which are clearly black, green, and gold. She believed that the unity of the oppressed and the marginalized was paramount and sacrosanct. For that reason, she contributed immensely in setting up the Women's National Coalition, which drew its membership from all political affiliation. For her unwavering commitment, she was elected as a convener of a coalition. This will eventually lead to the drafting of the Women's Charter, whose preamble clearly resonates with what Dr. Frene stood for. Let me, for the benefit of this sitting and all South Africans, remind ourselves of the emphatic words as contained in the preamble of the first draft of the Women's Charter, open quote. We, the women of South Africa, wives and mothers, working women and housewives, African, Indian, European, and colored, hereby declare our aim of striving for a removal of all laws, regulations, conventions, and customs that discriminate against us as women and that deprived us in any way of our inherent right to the advantages, responsibilities, and opportunities that society offers to any one section of the population, close quote. I am particularly pleased that sectoral parliament under the stewardship of the deputy chairperson of the NCOP, Mayor Lucas, and the deputy speaker, Ntate Tsinoli, attach a high premium of importance on the Women's Charter. They have, in the current term of parliament, instituted a review session of the Women's Charter. These review sessions have rolled out to almost all provinces with the view to assessing the Charter's impact in the quest to improve the lives of women in our country. We need to escalate our support for this program to cover all women, irrespective of where they could be found, in honor of Dr. Frene Ginwala, whose mission it was to see them liberated. Let's find them on the shop floor, in professional setting, and in many firms where they do not have the equal rights as the male counterparts, but get paid half the salary which men earn. It cannot be that so many years into our democracy, women continue to be face of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. When we demanded accountability from the board and management of ISCOM on the alleged utterances made by one executive who said to have branded women as possessing a less than M16 intelligence, we had Mam Frene in our mind. For context, for those who don't understand, M16 is a standard issue shoulder weapon designed to fire small, higher velocity rounds. Those with military experience will know that the caliber of a rifle will pale in comparison. For instance, the AK-47, which maintains its effectiveness even after being subjected to harsh conditions. We view such utterances in the same indignation as load shedding, as the one cannot be placed higher than the other. Both deserve to be eradicated, and we shall do so to honor Mam Frene. We welcome the commitment made by the chairman of the board of ISCOM, Mr. Mokwana, to investigate the matter and report to the joint committees as expected. In doing so, he will have honored the legacy of colossal women whose works will continue to outlive her. Dr. Frene ascended to the office of Speaker in the first democratic parliament, but such accolades concealed years of suffering and persecution. She stared death in the face by challenging the apartheid state machinery, and it was only fitting that she was placed at the helm of a house charged with the responsibility to repeal all apartheid laws as the uppermost responsibility of the first parliament. Save for the few occasions when parliament had male leaders, the appointment of Dr. Ginwala was groundbreaking. It paved the way for other women leaders to come in and hold their own, to mention just those that we know of. Joyce Huali, may her soul rest in peace. Mambalega Mbete, Gwen Mahlangu Kabinde, Naledi Pando, Thandi Modise, and now Mapisa Ngakula. Drew inspiration from her stellar work and have done well in steering the ship during their difficult tenures. All of them have also had the distinct honor of working alongside in the various missions which sought to state a case for the liberation of South Africans in general and women in particular. We see you and we honor you. To quote our President Ramaphosa, open quote, many of the rights and material benefits South Africans enjoy today have their origin in the legislative program of the inaugural democratic parliament under Dr. Ginwala's leadership, close quote. Comrade Frene can be counted as part of a proud lineage of courageous women that have fought for the freedom of all in this country, men and women, black and white. Yet, despite significant progress, women are still underrepresented in position of authority, responsibility, influence across some areas in public life. We'll remember Dr. Frene as a pioneer in fighting for the end of apartheid and building of our democracy. In conclusion, I want to borrow from the words of one of Albert Camus, who once said, open quote, in the midst of winter, I find there was within me an invincible summer, close quote. The passing of Mam Frene Ginwala may have trusted all of us into a season of winter, but I believe in the collective of summer within all of us. Her family, friends, and relatives should find solace in that hers was a race well run and a life well lived. We will strive to emulate her example in words and in deeds. Notwithstanding what Mother Teresa once said, open quotes, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love, close quote. Robola khotso, Mama Waruna, hamba kahle Mbogodo, lala ngokolo, Madam Speaker. May her soul rest in eternal peace. I thank you.
Thank you very much. To follow is Honorable S.N. Swartz.
Honourable Speaker, NCOP Chair, colleagues, may I firstly take this opportunity on behalf of Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, the Meshwe family and the ACDP of expressing deep thanks and appreciation to all friends, church leaders and to you, Speaker, and to President Ramaphosa for their numerous messages received following the very sad passing of Ma Lydia Meshwe last week. It is deeply appreciated and we thank you. Honourable Speaker, the ACDP would again like to express its deepest condolences to the Ginwala family and friends and to the ANC on the passing of Dr. Ginwala. Dr. Ginwala was born in 1932 and completed an LLB law degree at the University of London, qualified as a barrister, and obtained a doctorate in philosophy from Oxford University. And she was elected as Speaker in the new Parliament after the 1994 elections. And I was honored to attend the opening of Parliament in 1994, unbeknown that 5 years later I would be elected to Parliament. For 10 years, she helped establish an institution that reflected the great diversity, the struggles, the aspirations, the culture and practices of all South Africans. She performed her role as Speaker with diligence, fairness, and integrity, and was always mindful that it was her responsibility to serve the people and to do everything within her means to advance her cause, a real servant leader. An example was her determination to see that the smallest parties were entitled to be respected and heard in every debate. At that stage in 1999, the ACDP was the smallest party, but is now far bigger and still growing. In every portfolio committee and in every committee, ACDP President Reverend Kenneth Mesher will attest to that fact. And today, 30 years later, this is perhaps Dr. Ginwala's greatest legacy, a multi-party democracy where every diverse voice is heard. And I had the honor of serving for 5 years from 1999 to 2004 under her leadership as Speaker. And I can personally attest to her friendship and to these wonderful attributes that she showed. On a lighter note, she was also an excellent boxing referee. And who will remember the fisticuff between MP Mani Schoeman and Johnny de Lange? And Johnny de Lange retaliated so quickly that Mani ended up in the ANC in 2001. But what is important, and I really hope on a concluding note, that Dr. Ginwala had a significant hand in drafting the statement that was said after that incident. The way parties manage their members and set values and codes of behavior will inevitably be reflected in members' conduct in Parliament. The levels of violence and disorder in our society are already very high. The manner in which the House conducts its business and the behavior of members should not give credence to the view that ours is a society in which physical and verbal abuse are accepted norms, but should rather reinforce the founding values of democracy of which we are custodians. Again, the ACDP expresses its deepest condolences. May her soul rest in peace. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now proceed to Honorable NLS Nkwangwa.
Kwangwa. Thank you very much, the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces and the Speaker of the National Assembly. On behalf of the United Democratic Movement, I want to take this opportunity to extend our deepest and heartfelt condolences to the Ginwala family and loved ones, as well as her political party, the African National Congress. Today we bid farewell to one of the stalwarts of our liberation struggle, a remarkable women's rights activist whose strides can be traced back from being a member of the task force which established the ANC Women's League and founder member of the Women's National Coalition, which united women across political, economic, and social and religious spheres. Her aim was to empower women and thereby reduce the gender-powered inequalities. To the family, to the Ginwala family, we share in your sadness as we remember this struggle stalwart who belongs to the generation of the titans that once, in Zizi's words, pulled us out of the abyss and placed us on a pedestal of hope on which we continue to rest. This is the generation that looked beyond the debilitating threat of civil war during the struggle for freedom and kept our gaze on the prospect of glory and freedom. Whatever the circumstances, however daunting the challenges may have been, they made sure that we looked forward to the sunrise of our tomorrow. As the Speaker of our first democratically elected Parliament, she laid a solid foundation for our Parliament and our constitutional democracy. As a result, in a memory and honor, we owe it to ensure that this Parliament does not serve as an institution that subverts checks and balances on the executive, but rather ensures that we truly hold the executive to account. Speaker Ginwala regrettably departs at a time when our nation is in dire need of leadership. when our people have had to endure all forms of avoidable hardships due to bad leadership and misrule, to the point where they at times seem to be surrendering to the inevitable night. Speaker Ginwala, as you depart to join the many departed struggle icons, we hope that you will collectively continue to serve as a galaxy of stars that provide us with a guiding light in what appears to be a forbidding night. In a poem, She's Gone, David Hawkins says, we can shed tears that she's gone, or we can smile because she has lived. We can close our eyes and pray that she will come back, or we can open our eyes and see all that is left and try to preserve it. We can turn our back on tomorrow because of yesterday, or we can be happy for tomorrow because our yesterday had struggle icons like Mama Frene Ginwala. In conclusion, Maya Angelou, in a poem, When Great Trees Fall, she says, and I quote, when great souls die after a period, peace blooms slowly and always irregularly. Our senses restored never to be the same whisper to us, they existed, we can be and be better, for they existed. Menze Thixo aphumle ngonaphakade, umkhanyisele ngokhanyiso olungacimiyo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now invite Honorable Parker.
Thank you, House Chairperson. I guess my brief might have been not correct because I heard some political statements being made, but I guess I will stick to the memory of Dr. Frene Ginwala and leave the rest for the State of the Nation address. Members of the Ginwala family, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Speaker, Honorable members, all dignitaries in attendance, and fellow South Africans, good day. It is with great sadness, but also great joy that I'm able to address you today. Great sadness at losing a pioneer in the political sphere, but great joy in knowing that the life of Dr. Frene Ginwala has truly changed the lives of many South Africans, particularly the youth of our country, and I have no doubt that she is and should be a role model to young aspiring politicians, particularly women. A lifelong advocate of democracy, well before she walked the corridors of Parliament, an academic through and through, being published on issues ranging from democracy, good governance, human rights, anti-apartheid, and human security. The activist work of Dr. Ginwala, but particularly her published work, no doubt aided in the deinstitutionalization of apartheid by bringing to light the plight of South Africans during apartheid and garnering international pressure. Serving in the Constitutional Assembly, coupled with her instrumental role in developing provisions on the role and independence of Parliament. After 31 years in exile, Dr. Ginwala was rightfully in a central role, shaping the transition to democracy, but also played a pivotal role in women's rights in South Africa and will be remembered as a pioneer of women's rights. Having been part of the inaugural press conference of the ANC Women's League and involved in the development of the Women's National Coalition with its aim of drawing a women's charter, a fight our women are still battling against close to 30 years after the dawn of democracy, whether it be for equal representation or participation or simply a battle to stay alive in this country where our women are murdered on a daily basis. But we are here today to celebrate Dr. Ginwala, who was elected and sworn in as the first Democratic Speaker of the National Assembly in 1994 until 2004. Being the first Speaker in the new democratic dispensation, no doubt came with numerous challenges as the new Parliament brought together public representatives from very diverse political backgrounds and got them to work together for the betterment of South Africa. But Dr. Ginwala commanded respect, betterment of South Africa, but Dr. Ginwala commanded respect from the members of parliament and the public during her tenure. In my opinion, this is due to the fact that she had a strong commitment to the transparency and representative nature of government that garnered respect from allies and those in opposition benches. Using her position to truly shape this new institution of parliament that reflected the entirety of South Africa, our true diversity and culture, shaped a political path that could allow young Democrats, such as myself, to walk the halls of parliament with pride. Her influence was felt not only in South Africa, but in Africa as well, as she played a leading role in crafting the protocol that led to the creation of the Pan-African Parliament. It is very rare that you find an individual that dedicates their lives to the people, and that is exactly who Dr. Ginwala did. Whether through her published work or her role as speaker, she understood that this was her responsibility to serve the people, and we thank her for this selfless act. Upon her departure from Parliament, Dr. Ginwala became the first Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, showing her continued commitment to improving the lives of South Africans and to education in our country. I'd like to conclude by thanking the family of Dr. Ginwala on behalf of all South Africans for allowing this strong woman to be a part of our lives as well. We have to remember that having such a politically active life has an effect on family life, and we want to thank you for allowing us the privilege. We share your sorrow, but we also need to rejoice at the amazing work she has achieved in her lifetime. We hope that your courageous spirit will guide us as we ponder around solutions with the current challenging state we find ourselves in as a country. Phumla ngoxolo gohagazi, wanga umphefumulo wakho ungaphumla ecaleni kwemisebenzi yakho, maze nethole.
Thank you very much. To follow is Honorable B.N. Heron.
Madam Speaker, it is an honor for me on behalf of Good to note our respect for the late Dr. Frene Ginwala. When she called South Africa's first democratically elected parliament to order in 1994, following 350 years of colonialism and apartheid, she did so with a level of calm authority, legitimacy, and grace that instantly propelled the office of the Speaker to the very center of the country's transformation process. Her leadership in the establishment of a robust legislature and committee system that would go on to adopt a groundbreaking constitution was critical to shaping our democracy. Dr. Ginwala's appointment as Speaker was the culmination of a life of opposition to authoritarianism and injustice. For many years, she had struggled for freedom, integrity, and dignity for all South Africans. And in 1994, she brought these struggles to Parliament. She brought them with her because she knew that a democratic election wasn't the end point of the process, but a new beginning, a new canvas on which to paint a new picture of a South Africa that cared about all its people. Every day that we do our work as parliamentarians, we honor Dr. Ginwala because it was she who laid down our systems and rules. We must robustly defend the founding principles of our democracy and the integrity of our living constitution. But if we are truly to honor Dr. Ginwala, we must complete the business she could not finish in her lifetime of dealing with the inequalities wrought by our past. She exposed apartheid state violence during the 1976 insurrection and the murders and kidnappings of South Africans at the hands of the apartheid security forces. It is in our hands to ensure that justice for those whose lives was lost by making sure that their TRC cases are prosecuted. It is in our hands to review and update our reparations policy and spend the money accumulating in the President's Fund. It is in our hands to continue the fight for spatial justice, to address the legacy of skewed land ownership, segregated towns and cities, and the neglect of rural communities. By tackling these legacies of the past, we honor Dr. Ginwala's efforts to expose the injustice of the Group Areas Act and forced removals. Conversely, Madam Speaker, when we fail to do so, we subvert Dr. Ginwala's life effort and many other former leaders of integrity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now proceed to Honorable Anne Hardebe. Honorable Hardebe.
Honorable Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Honorable Minister, Honorable Ministers and Honorable Members. I did not have the privilege of meeting the iconic Dr. Frene Ginwala. However, as greatly described by the IFP Chief Whip, she personified the essence of a fiercely independent-minded woman who would never sacrifice her principle on the altar of political expediency. Being appointed as the first Speaker of South Africa's Democratic Parliament, we are deeply grateful for the contribution and dedication she extended towards South Africa and its democracy. The role of a Speaker is multifaceted. The responsibilities are constitutional, statutory, and procedural and administrative. As Speaker is an enabler of debate, a protector of the rights of the public, and enables public representatives to hold the executive into account. She embodied the full expression of these responsibilities and left an example for all those who follow, setting the standard to never lose sight of our primary goal, which is to serve the people of our country to the best of our abilities. The Inkatha Freedom Party would like to extend our sincere condolences to the Ginwala family, her friends and colleagues, as well as all her comrades in the ANC. May we all remember her as we try to lead our country to prosperity, and more so her character and teachings. She committed her life to serve South Africans in various capabilities. She was a trailblazer and pioneer for women in both politics and academia. And as the first appointed Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, she has broken barriers and opened doors for women to not only follow in her footsteps, but also to make their mark as leaders in our country. Her devotion to constitutional democracy began with the drafting of South Africa's constitution and has never wavered, as she has stood for justice and truth, even in the face of political pressure. As the IFP, we wish to acknowledge her life and the remarkable legacy she leaves behind. May her soul rest in perfect peace. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Hardebe. We will now move on to Honorable A.M. Shaikh Imam.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Let me also acknowledge and welcome the Deputy Speaker. I think it's long overdue you came back, sir. Thank you very much, but let me acknowledge the presence of ministers, deputy ministers, honorable members in this House. Honorable Speaker, whether you say Frene Ginwala or Frene Ginwala, there is only one Ma or Mother Frene. Often I think we tend to forget about the sacrifices many of our freedom fighters made so that we could enjoy the fruits of those sacrifices and that freedom today. To the ANC, it was Mama Frene Ginwala that set your first offices outside of the borders of South Africa. It was Mama Frene Ginwala who was called upon to provide an escape route for our former leader, Oliver Reginald Ntambo. These are just some of the sacrifices some of our leaders have made. Now, Honorable Speaker, or let me rather say Madam Speaker, so I don't make the mistake. Madam Speaker, in order to pay tribute to our late mother, the befitting thing to do in this particular honorable house is to bring back the dignity that she set here in 1994. What we have today is clearly not the vision that Mama Frene Ginwala and many others of our leaders had when they fought for our freedom in this country. So yes, I can stand here all day and all night. I can attempt to say a lot of things, but the fact is I will not be able to do justice to the role that our former leader, Frene Ginwala, played, so that we today can enjoy the fruits of that freedom. But having said that, I think one of the examples that she learned and that she raised time and time again, that we are different when it comes to religion, when it comes to culture, but in the interest of the country, we must all come together. And if there's one thing we need to take from here, is that advice and guidance of hers. We are all South Africans. We need to come together despite our differences in order to honor Mama Frene Ginwala for the role that she played and all our leaders that have left us. To the family of Frene Ginwala, we want to extend on behalf of the National Freedom Party our condolences. Thank you for giving her to us. Yes, she made great sacrifices even in her personal life. Our condolences to the African National Congress. You have lost indeed a great leader, an inspirational leader. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you very much. We'll now proceed to Dr. M.S. Mutsega.
Honorable Speaker, Honorable Chair of the NCOP, the family of Comrade Ginwala, distinguished members of this august house. It is a great pleasure and honor for us in the African National Congress to pay tribute to a distinguished companion of O.R. Tambo. There were three main pillars of the African struggle for national liberation, as our icon Walter Sisulu defined it. It was mass mobilization, the underground, and the international pillar. Comrade Frene Ginwala was one of the master architects of the international pillar of our struggle. Comrade Frene can also be defined as the companion of O.R. Tambo par excellence in Bemba language, Umkhalisani. Following the burning of the ANC in 1960, the underground ANC leadership sent Comrade Frene Ginwala to exile to prepare for the establishment of the international pillar of our struggle. Comrade Frene was cut out for this task. She grew up in a Pasi family in Johannesburg that had business interests in Mozambique. She had completed a law degree at London University and then completed a PhD in philosophy at Oxford University. Instead of pursuing a career in the United Kingdom, however, she moved to East Africa to assist ANC members escaping the crackdowns that followed the Sharpeville massacre in 1960. One of the first persons she assisted was O.R. Tambo himself, who was sent by the ANC underground to establish the ANC external mission outside. Comrade Frene could be defined as one of the outstanding female companions of Comrade O.R. She worked closely with O.R. for many years. Comrade Frene worked as a journalist and a broadcaster in Zambia, Mozambique, and Tanzania, and was the managing editor of the Standard and Sunday News in Tanzania. Here, she founded and edited Spearhead, a monthly journal highlighting the liberation struggle. The name of the journal referred to the spear of the nation, Umkhonto weSizwe. During her time in exile, Comrade Frene wrote extensively on the subject of sanctions as an intellectually polished political activist. Comrade Frene relied on international law to make a case for sanctions against the apartheid regime and also the responsibility of the democratic world towards the victims of inhuman apartheid policies. As a highly respected, forceful, and independent-minded person, Comrade Frene never ceased to drive home to the overwhelming male ANC leadership the extent to which the creativity and wisdom of women members was being suppressed by traditional sexist expectations and behavior. Comrade Frene demonstrated the creativity and wisdom of women in 1960 when OR was instructed to leave South Africa to mobilize international support to bring down the apartheid regime. At that time, Botswana and Zimbabwe were under British colonial rule, and the British colonial administrators were unsympathetic to the struggle of the African people. On the 22nd March 1960, the day after the Sharpeville massacre, OR was instructed to travel to Tanzania to establish the ANC mission in exile. OR had to travel through these two British territories where he ran the risk of being kidnapped by apartheid agents or deported by British colonial officials in Botswana. From Botswana, OR still had to cross more than 2,000 kilometers of colonial territory to reach Tanzania. OR met up with Yusuf Dadoo and a journalist, Segal. It was creativity and wisdom of Frene Ginwala that made it possible for OR and his companions to reach Dar es Salaam. After the Kabye conference, Frene Ginwala was not appointed to the Constitutional Committee, and when the Department of Legal and Constitutional Affairs was established, Frene Ginwala was not appointed, which means Frene Ginwala was not a careerist. She continued to work for the organization, and together with the likes of Johnny McCartney, they were able to organize the conference in Arusha, Tanzania, called the World United Against Apartheid. And again, Frene, working with the like of Father Trevor Huddleston, OR himself, were able to organize the conference in Harare in 1987, meant on women and children under apartheid. Now, when we dealt with developing the constitutional guidelines for a democratic South Africa, Frene made sure that the rights of women and children are top on the agenda. And from the Harare conference, working with the likes of Mama Albertina Sisulu, Sister Bernard Ngube, she ensured that in this country, for the first time, we had what we called National Committee on Children's Rights. The rights that we are talking about on women and children in this parliament would not have been there if Frene had not worked underground and after the unbanning to ensure that at CODESA, the rights of women and children are placed high on the agenda. And if we were to honor Comrade Frene, I would say that all the parliamentary constituency offices must go and establish committees on women and children and revive what we used to call community law centers and community-based advice centers, so that we don't rely on the state machinery to combat gender-based violence and femicide. We need to mobilize our people to defend themselves because, as OR taught us, the people are their own liberators. We can't rely on the police and give an additional job description to Comrade Kele. He has enough work to do. The people must be empowered to go and defend themselves, and that is possible. And that's what Comrade Frene led for us. But also the work that she did made it possible that today we have a powerful South African women lawyers, and these lawyers are now swelling the ranks in the executive, in parliament, in business, and everywhere. So I have no doubt that the young women that are here, who are the products of the good work of Comrade Frene Ginwala, will carry on with the work that she did. And I thank you on behalf of the African National Congress for the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mtsega. Well, speaker after speaker have spoken well and have reinforced our history. And all of us truly appreciate the mentioning of the pillars, the international mobilization, mass mobilization, the underground, and indeed the armed struggle. Thank you very much. We now proceed to the next speaker, Honorable S.M. Chafta.
Honorable Chairperson, it is really a great honor to be one of many South Africans celebrating the life of Dr. Frene Ginwala. She is known for her gallant commitment to the struggle against apartheid and gender inequality. She tore the apartheid regime apart and its architecture. In her term as Speaker of Parliament from 1994 until 2004, she was part of democratic parliament which passed many transformative laws. These include the Child Care Amendment Act passed in 1996, the Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act, which was also passed in 1996, the Public Finance Management Act passed in 1999, including the Division of Revenue Act, among many other legislative reforms which were aimed at transforming the social, financial, crime policing, and economic architecture of South African polity. This illustrious contribution to project of reconstructing a constitutional democracy is unmatched. It is this regard that the country is not only mourning her loss, but also celebrating her colossal life. Her commitment to the struggle of women came alive in many occasions, such as when she formed part of a working group which led to the formation of the ANC Women's League. She also played a critical role in setting up Women's National Coalition as its national convener. She represented women in our country, on the diaspora and abroad with sterling leadership. Sadly, this selfless leadership is missing in South African body politic. Servant leadership has long left our national consciousness. We bid farewell to this selfless giant. Finally, Honorable Chair, we thank her family for allowing and supporting her to serve the South Africans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now proceed to Honorable S.A. Lutuli.
Chairperson, umuntu akabingelele kubabukele emakhaya, abingelele emndenini kaDr. Frene Ginwala, abingelele nama-ground forces of economic freedom fighters. Chairperson, the first Speaker of the National Assembly, Dr. Frene Ginwala, demonstrated how someone can live an inspiring legacy of love, sacrifice, and perseverance. Dr. Frene dedicated her life to compassion and equality, to liberate our people and advocating for women's rights. And despite how modest she was about her achievement, our memories of Speaker Frene Ginwala resonate strongly because hers is a life story and causes us to reflect on South Africa's history in this parliament, and it inspires people even today. Dr. Frene will be remembered for her important role she played in women's liberation. She will be remembered as a fierce feminist, championing the struggle against patriarchy, guiding by a deep faith to engage the world around her and to act as an agent of change. Her persistent is the face of apartheid regime is a story of an extraordinary woman, which is why today we connect to Dr. Frene because of her liberation efforts, as her life story expresses bravery and faith. Today we remember her efforts in spreading awareness throughout the world of the violation of human rights and dignity. And we are being committed by the apartheid government against black people. Dr. Frene remains a representative of ubuqhawe nobuqhawekazi and come to symbolize extraordinary leadership in the face of overwhelming odds. We shall remember her commitment to freedom and her commitment to advance the ideals ebekele umthethosisekelo. In Parliament, Speaker, as a Speaker of our National Assembly, she ruled with firm and fair hand and was instrumental in establishing training programs for women in Parliament. Dr. Frene was instrumental in the development of Parliament during the first 10 years of democracy, especially in relation to oversight matters and the effective running of committees. She ruled with dignity and commanded the respect of all members of Parliament and public. She interpreted the rules of this House impartially and did not represent only the views of the ruling party. Njengabanye abantu esibabonayo. She maintained order and defended the rights of privilege of all members who, without exception, including the right of freedom of expression. Siyazi kanikwazi lokho. Chairperson, Dr. Fraser's leadership style differs from the one of the current Speaker, which we have become subjected to as this House. This House has, in recent years, degenerated its toothless House into this toothless House, which only serves to rubber stamp decisions made by African National Congress. This House lacks accountability, Chairperson, and fails to scrutinize actions taken by the ruling party, a failure which was noted by the State Capture Commission. The executive is hardly held accountable for their destructive actions, and the role which they continue to play is pushing the country into a failed state. The Constitution gives Parliament, ANC, listen to this. The Constitution gives Parliament the authority and the obligation to oversee an exercise of public power and hold the executive to account. Yet members of Parliament come to this House and waste their time and not fulfill constitutional mandates of representing the interest of the public. This House is on its knees and has abandoned the rules of being watchdogs. There exists a decline of decorum of this House, which is direct cause of the inability of the Speaker to rule Parliament in a neutral and impartial manner. The Parliament is factional and stands biased towards the ruling party and has a clear agenda to suppress opposition parties, so to protect its president. And his useless and directionless ministers and borders and squander states resources. The Parliament used force and physical assault members during Parliament sitting in order to protect the ruling party It also mutes members of parliament on visual platform without just cause. Parliament has become but an extension of Lutuli House as political needs often overweigh those of the people, and unless this is corrected, this house shall be reduced to nothing more than producing corrupt, excessive spending members. Nosiviwe Ginwala rules this house with an icon fist whenever opposition parties pose question in the
Order members. To heckle a bit is not a problem, but to drown the speaker represents a particular challenge. So I urge on you to please, yes, honorable members, please, let's have a bit of order. Proceed.
Nosiviwe Ginwala will repeat, rules this house with the icon fist whenever opposition parties pose questions to the president and the ruling party. Her conduct and leadership style stands in sharp contrast of the Dr. Fraser. Chairperson, Dr. Frene Ginwala was a fighter.
Yes. I see there's a point of order there. Honorable Khadebe.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson of the province or of the council. I think that from the side of the presidium, there must be a ruling of respecting the dignity of this occasion. I don't think that this is the time to antagonize other people who are here to respect the memory of a revolutionary. So she cannot just cast around, especially the way she's doing. Please.
Yeah. No, thank you very much.
And we cannot call each other in first name terms, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sure the member knows that you can't just refer to members on a first name basis. But equally, honorable members, as I plead for progress and a movement forward, let's ensure that heckling is kept to a minimum. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairperson. I know when one touches a nerve, you hear people bebangumsindo. As I was saying, Chairperson, that Nosiviwe Ginwala rules this house with isandla sensimbi whenever opposition parties pose questions to the president and the ruling party.
Honorable Naledi Pando, on what point are you raising?
Honorable Chairperson, I rise in terms of the rules, which are very clear. In this house, I don't know whether in the other house the honorable member comes from, we address honorable members as honorable members. The honorable member on the podium has referred disrespectfully to the Speaker of the National Assembly. We would not, Chairperson, refer to you in that way. And we would ask you to ask the honorable member who is speaking to respect the rules of the House of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces and our presiding officer, the Honorable Madam Speaker. Asibangumsindo, I wish to remind the member, we are saying in terms of the rules, you are not following the rules. I thank you, Chairperson.
Honorable Lutul, I'm sure you know this. You can't just refer to a member by name. Members are honorable members and is standard. So I'm really making an appeal to you that you should desist from doing those things that are not in keeping with the rules.
Thank you, Chairperson. As I was saying, Honorable Siviwe rules this House. What do you want now? Rule this House with an iron fist whenever opposition parties pose key questions to the President and the ruling party. Her conduct and leadership style stand sharp contrast of Dr. Frene. Chairperson, Dr. Ginwala was a fighter, and her legacy will anchor throughout the ages. And we shall remember her
On a point of
aspiration
order,
of
House Chair.
economic.
Speaker, on a point of
Honorable
order.
member.
On a point of order, Speaker.
I think honorable members,
On a point of order.
we have to, inside and outside of this House, really ensure that the decorum of the House is not undermined. And that we can't repeat the same thing over and over again, having been urged by presiding officers to toe the line and to comply. Honorable member, can you please move on?
Arrive on a point of order.
As we move towards closing, because your time is really being eaten away by other things other than the business that is in front of the House. So I urge you to please move towards concluding your speech.
On a point of order.
Yes.
Chairperson.
Tlawini.
Thank you very much, Chairperson.
On what point are you rising?
Chairperson, you are biased on your approach because our members are being held at. I was held at earlier on, you never ruled. They are continuously doing that. Number two, we're not going to be told by any person whatsoever how to do our condolences and which sentence to write and which sentence they don't feel comfortable with. We're going to use this time because this is our time by the EFF, given by the EFF. So we'll allow our members to say whatever they need to say within their speeches. If they are going to be micromanaged there from the Rupert's farm, it's their own indaba. But allow us, she must read what is said there by the Winnie Mandela House in Johannesburg.
Member,
Thank you.
Honorable member, you are now abusing the freedom of speech, and we are delivering a long-winded speech there. That has nothing really to do with the matters in front of us. As presiding officers, we have a responsibility to be impartial. But impartiality does not mean members can stand up at any point in time and say whatever they want to say in a manner that is not sensitive to and in keeping with how the business of the House ought to be run. Honorable member, please desist from doing what you have been doing.
Chairperson, Dr. Ginwala was a fighter, and her legacy will anchor throughout the ages. Excuse. We shall remember her aspiration of economic transformation and her existence of women being represented in position of political power. Hers was a remarkable life, which offers lesson for all of us today. Her name will remain forever memorialized in this House and in our hearts. See, economic freedom fighters, it's lala kahle, uhambe kahle, ulale ngoxolo comrade Frene. But Chairperson, respect is earned, is not forced. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We will now proceed to Honorable Nyonso.
Honorable Speaker, Dr. Frene Ginwala conducted her duties as Speaker of Parliament with the highest distinction and moral standards to give respectability to a forum of political debate whose mandate is to question the wrongdoings of the executives. Ginwala was a pioneer in the initial steps of a historic phase when the new political dispensation began in 1994. She brought dignity, fairness, and high discipline to the conduct of the business of the National Assembly. World-renowned author Alice Walker could as well be talking about the life of Dr. Frene Ginwala when she said, "A humanist is one who unites women of the emerging nations from the peripheries of the world with the center of feminist women at the intersection of race, class, and gender oppression." Walker further clarified that a humanist is a black feminist. These are women who are deeply committed to the wholeness and well-being of all humanity, male and female. Before assuming the position of Speaker of Parliament, Dr. Ginwala spent her life in the struggle against apartheid and settler colonialism. She did not want glory bestowed on her because she understood how intricate and sometimes fragile the struggle itself was. She emphasized attention to the details and that all activities were linked to each other in a long chain of events to come to the ultimate freedom and national liberation that we all desire to achieve. This is how Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania understands Dr. Frene Ginwala's entire devotion to the cause of gender parity and the emancipation of women on a worldwide basis. She overcame bias and sectarianism. It is only the misguided and myopic who would find fault with Dr. Ginwala during her term as Parliament Speaker. Dr. Ginwala, like the late Mamunom Voboy, Elizabeth Sibeko, and Zondeni Sobukwe, and others, fits among the pantheon of mothers of the nation, whose contribution immensely in the struggle for national liberation. We take off our hats to her memory. May her soul rest in peace.
Thank you very much. Now we move to the Deputy Chairperson of the NCOP, Honorable Lucas.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Deputy Speaker, and the family members of Dr. Ginwala that is present here today at this very important joint sitting. Madam Speaker, Honorable Chairperson, for me it is indeed an honor to be able to reflect on the life and times of the late founding Speaker of our democratic parliament, Dr. Frene Ginwala. 2023 marks 28 years since the inception of our constitutional democracy. As we reflect on the importance of this turning point in history, as accompanied by the founding provisions of South Africa's interim constitution, it is imperative to recognize the immeasurable contribution that was made by trailblazers such as Dr. Ginwala. Our democratic parliamentary dispensation was indeed shaped by a leadership ethos and a character which was forged over decades of struggle for the attainment of freedom and democracy in South Africa. We appropriately pay tribute to her legacy in recognition of the selfless leader she was and the extraordinary contribution that she made in the history of our country, charting a course for many of us to follow. And I must say, some of us must really rise to the occasion and forget about our personal political interests. Honorable members, Dr. Ginwala was a true activist, an all-rounded cadre, and she was also very instrumental in establishing the African National Congress international presence. She worked in Tanzania, Zambia, Mozambique, the United Kingdom, you name it, as an ANC official and as a journalist and a broadcaster in East Africa and Europe. I am going to focus on certain of the attributes of Dr. Ginwala because there are so many. You can really not in one speech cover everything that she tried to do. That's why I say a well-rounded cadre. Someone that could do anything to make sure that she contribute to the freedom of our people. Prior to her return from exile in 1999, Dr. Ginwala, as many have said before, was head of the political research unit in the office of the ANC president, Comrade Oliver Tambo, and she was well published on issues of democracy, good governance, human rights, and human security. History also reminds us that after an absence of 31 years, she returned in 1990 when the African National Congress was unbanned. As we already know by now, she became the first Speaker of the National Assembly in 1994, establishing Parliament as a democratic institution and providing the impartiality, integrity, and authority required to preside over the establishment of a new democratic order through the necessary legislative provisions to transform and unite a divided nation, as we so clearly heard from people like the Minister of International Relations, who spoke so fondly of the years that they worked together. She presided over the adoption of a series of defining and transformative legislative instruments which were critical for establishing democracy and equality in South Africa, thereby giving concrete expression to the mandate of Parliament. She led this very critical process of repealing apartheid laws, which significantly strengthened efforts towards nation building in our country. Through her work as a speaker, she also introduced the concept of an open parliament with open plenaries and committee meetings, thereby establishing democratic systems of openness, transparency, and public participation, which stood in direct contrast to the exclusionary system that we had before. To illustrate how committed she was to establishing an open parliament, let us recall an interview that she conducted with Daniel Lieberfield about the concept of an open parliament, where she articulated clearly the importance of an open parliament, stating as follows, and I quote, "I want people to know that Parliament is open to them, that it's not a citadel on the hill for the gods to play around in," close quote. She rolled out programs of public education and numerous initiatives aimed at improving public involvement and participation, which are all critical aspects of a participatory democracy. These systems and progressive ideas that she championed have shaped the manner in which we approach our sectoral responsibilities. As Honorable Nyambi have mentioned, myself and the Deputy Speaker are responsible for sectoral parliaments and other sectoral initiatives, as we strive to create public participation platforms for all sectors of society. Indeed, today public participation stands as one of the key pillars of our democratic parliament, and we must pay appropriate tribute to the champions of this important pillar of our parliamentary democracy in recognition of the systems as established under Dr. Ginwala's leadership. We must also recognize Dr. Ginwala as a genuine Pan-Africanist, as she was the prime mover behind the formation of the Pan-African Parliament. This also speaks of a legacy in advancing Pan-Africanist principles and ideals for the benefit of all Africans through the legislative houses across the continent. As we reflect on her legacy in the legislative environment, it is also imperative that we remember her contribution towards advancing gender equality, not only in the ANC, but also in the impact of her feminist ideas on South Africa's constitutional and legislative landscape. She was an important voice championing the struggle against patriarchy and the oppression of women, which is a phenomenon that sadly still affects the status of women in South Africa today. Her work in championing the struggle against patriarchy began when she was in exile, when she worked with the ANC Women's Section to ensure that ANC principles include non-sexism. It was a long and conflictual process, but by the mid-1980s, all ANC documents carried the commitment to a non-racial, non-sexist democracy. It is also important to emphasize that this was so much more than a linguistic shift. It enabled feminists within the ANC and women to demand that the commitment to advance a non-racial and non-sexist democracy be followed through in programs and policies of the country. She also set up the ANC's Emancipation Commission in 1991, which was dedicated to advancing gender equality and combating sexism in the movement. Although it was never intended to compete with the Women's League, it did have strategic status that was ensured by placing it under the authority of the then ANC President, Oliver Reginald Tambo. This was a strategic base from which Ginwala could drive the demand for gender equality in support of the Women's League's efforts and endeavors. During the multi-party negotiations to end apartheid, when it became apparent that gender concerns would sink to the bottom of the list of priorities, she led the process of forming an independent women's organization, the Women's National Coalition, that would unite women across political parties and ideological lines. She described it as a conspiracy, and I quote, in fact, as a conspiracy as women, of women. The central aim of the Women's National Coalition was to draw up a women's charter while reflecting on the divisions of the first charter, which was developed in tandem with the Freedom Charter. She was subsequently elected national convener of the coalition, where she demonstrated a robust leadership in ensuring that women's issues are appropriately considered as part of South Africa's transitional arrangements. The Women's National Coalition had two key demands, which included the inclusion of women in all decision-making processes regarding the shape of the post-apartheid state and constitution, and bringing an end to violence against women. Many contend that she knew that the transition process offered an important window of opportunity to insert feminist principles into the new state, but she also understood that the window of time was fleeting. This made her very impatient at times with other leaders who wanted to build the coalition from the bottom up. She was concerned that the often slow consultative process would mean that the charter would not be ready to be included alongside the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, and that the moment for greatest impact would lapse without any long-term gains being made for women. Although the charter was only adopted after the main constitutional debates were concluded, the coalition ensured that gender equality was firmly embedded in the country's final 1996 constitution. We should therefore recognize the critical provisions around key concepts of equality as embedded in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, which locates women as equals across the broader development spectrum in South Africa. We must also recognize her immense contribution, particularly in ensuring that the formation of our understanding of the concept of transformative constitutionalism to fundamentally also include gender provisions. The concept of transformative constitutionalism, which is with its founding tenets of shaping a constitutional framework to transform the lives of the dejected and oppressed, hence, importantly, also includes a significant recognition that women's rights also form part and parcel of the key thematic issues for discussion in South Africa's transitional arrangement and the country's development landscape. Dr. Ginwala was also passionately concerned about economic transformation, particularly as it impacted women's economic status in South Africa. She therefore proceeded to set up numerous study sessions on issues such as unpaid care and how women's contributions are often not properly remunerated despite their hard work and industrious efforts. She also wrote a hard-hitting challenge to the 50 male economists who crafted the ANC's key economic policies as it took power. Given the current state of our economy and the status of women, as those still disproportionately excluded from participating in the economy, it is imperative that we carry on the work that she started by ensuring that the economic policies and legislative instruments in our country are appropriately amended to clearly articulate women's access to economic activity across all economic sectors. In conversations and seminars amongst them, Dr. Ginwala was insistent that political representation was only a lever for feminism, not its end goal. We still have much to do to positively transform the status of women in South Africa. Sadly, the same issues that Dr. Ginwala and the peers so passionately fought against are still challenges that women in South Africa are facing today. Issues of gender-based violence and femicide have deepened, resulting in an ongoing low-intensity war against women in this country. Women's economic status in South Africa is still a cause for serious concern, as the majority of women are still economically excluded, while Black African women still form the majority of the poor, unemployed, and socially marginalized. It is therefore no coincidence that the Women's Parliament of 2019 took a decision to review the 1994 Women's Charter for Effective Equality. in order to assess progress made in implementing the provisions of the Charter. This process was undertaken by Parliament. It followed in the footsteps of Dr. Ginwala and the peers, who recognized that the shifting political landscape necessitated that women organize themselves across party political lines to ensure that women's rights are effectively built into the systems, policies, and legislative framework of our growing democracy. Sure, I'm so afraid Chairperson will say your time is up and I've got so much to say. So how do we honor her legacy? The question that we ought to answer is, how do we honor the enduring legacy of the South African giant? Some proposals that I want to make is that we jointly consider amending the Money Bills and Related Matters Act in order to ensure that gender-responsive planning and budgeting becomes mandatory when considering and passing our national budget. The status of women will significantly improve if we can ensure that the budget is not passed without considering its gender implications. This will ensure that women receive an equitable allocation of the national budget while ensuring that the provision of services are provided in a very gender-responsive manner. We must employ every effort to institutionalize the precepts of equality across all sectors of society and reposition them as key tenets of the social, political, and economic fabric of our society. We need to further forge a social compact and a resolute commitment to re-engineer systematic and institutional arrangements across the three spheres of government to enable gender-sensitive and good governance practices, policy redesign, planning, budgeting, and implementation practices. We also have to inculcate poverty mapping perspective in our gender-responsive planning and budgeting process and ensure that it be institutionalized as an imperative for planning. Parliament, through its committees...
As you move towards closing, Honourable Member.
I told you that. But in conclusion, let me just say, Dr. Ginwala did not die, but she multiplied. Let more of us work together as leaders in our contribution towards building a united, prosperous, and equal South Africa. May a revolutionary soul rest in peace and rise in glory. Kia leboga. Thank you very much. Baie dankie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Lucas. Next is Honorable M.G.E. Hendricks, Al Jamah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A befitting tribute to Comrade Frene would be to recognize and practice the concept of a national integrity system, which he described as fundamental to the development of an anti-corruption discourse. We will do justice to a great legacy to have strong and determined leadership that will lead by example, an example from top levels of political power. I start by quoting Comrade Frene. One cannot expect integrity from others unless leaders conform to the highest ethical standards. On behalf of Al Jamah Party, I extend our sincere condolences to the family, friends, and the African National Congress on the loss of Dr. Frene Ginwala, a struggle veteran who not only fought for justice, but also passionate in a fight against corruption. Comrade Frene continuously reminded government of the importance of the national integrity system, which was formed to fight corruption. At the third National Anti-Corruption Summit in 2008, she said the following, that our constitutional values and institutional arrangement should be the basis of the South African national integrity system. A year later, she expressed her disappointment at the failure of the National Anti-Corruption Forum to produce an annual report and a follow-up workshop. Inspired by Frene, Al Jamah is leading political parties with the numbers in the city of Johannesburg. Al Jamah is no one's pawn. Al Jamah will throw our weight behind a kid from Soweto. This is the new mayor of the city of Johannesburg, His Worship Alderman Abu Bakr Tapalo Ahmed, well groomed for this position for a decade. I was a kid from District 6 groomed by my mother. So leaders who were kids in our township struggles like Soweto and District 6, we will govern. This good governance is our tribute to Frene G. The legacy we are building is a legacy for Frene G. I recognize the daughter-in-law of Chief Albert Vili Latuli, Queen Como of the Nama Royal House, and Amir Khadameng, leader of the National Shura Council, the National African Leadership of the Muslim community, all came to pay tribute to Frene G, and we will leave that legacy behind. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
No, thank you very much, Honorable Hendricks. We'll now move on to Honorable Laureate. Dr. Laureate.
Honorable Speaker, Honorable Chairperson, not many have the opportunity to be part of the making of history. Even fewer have the opportunity to be present at the seminal point between a country's history and its future. And only a select few can use that point and opportunity to determine the future of a country and its people. The position of Speaker in the newly democratically elected National Assembly in 1994 was of critical importance. It would determine the success of the new parliament. It would set the tone. It would give direction and guidance to this new configuration. A daunting task and responsibility. So much depended on that moment when the newly elected Speaker would preside over the Assembly. The person to be elected had to be someone with gravitas, intelligence, skill, patience, and the ability to navigate an unfamiliar and uncertain process with unique dynamics. It was indeed a blessing that the new Speaker of the National Assembly was someone of the caliber of Dr. Frene Ginwala, a lawyer, a journalist, a politician, and academic. Although she had no prior experience of being a speaker, she displayed a deep understanding and appreciation of the office. Previous speakers today have spoken about Dr. Ginwala's vast experience and contributions, specifically in the field of gender equality, where she made her voice heard and her actions tangible. But in addition to this, I want to pay tribute to her legacy as Speaker of the National Assembly. In Cannon's concise guide to rules of order, he states that to become an effective chair, and we can read in Speaker, the individual must establish goodwill, respect, and trust between the chair and the Assembly. Now, to my great regret, I never had the opportunity to experience Dr. Ginwala as Speaker. But by judging from what the former members of Parliament have said, it seems clear that Dr. Ginwala was the embodiment of the requirements as set out by Cannon. She has been described as someone with brains and presence, as well as impressive qualifications. And what stood out was that she respected each and every party, regardless of their size. As the former DA Chief Whip Douglas Gibson said, she was determined to see to it that the smallest parties were entitled to be respected and heard in every debate, in every portfolio committee, and in every other committee. She exuded authority and dignity. That respect also resulted in members of all parties to respect her in return. She was also, however, known for her steely will, her determination, but above all, for firmness combined with fairness. Dr. Ginwala's legacy will be based on that moment in history, in 1994, when she held the future well-being and effectiveness of the National Assembly, Parliament, and by extension the country in her hand. That moment when she could determine the future direction of our Parliament. She rose to the occasion, navigated the complexities of a new democracy, and blazed the trail for the rest to follow. We, our Parliament, presiding officers and members, should honor this legacy. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And now to close the tributes is the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, Honorable Thandi Modise.
The Speaker of the National Assembly, Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, honorable members, it would be fitting, it would be right to look up to that green blouse in the gallery, to remember that some of us wore that blouse because Frene Ginwala was around. To remember that in her struggle, not only as a descendant of a people who were colonized, and no colonized people asked to be colonized. We never invite colonizers. But not only that, a descendant from a colonized people who were then trafficked and brought to South Africa as cheap labor. This is a woman whose descendants were not able to stay in certain parts of this country. Just for the younger ones, Indians were not allowed to stay in the Free State at particular points of our history in this country. This is a woman who not only becomes an activist, not only becomes a feminist, not only becomes a lawyer, but is an adjunct provocateur for the people, is a planner of missions for the people, is a nurturer and a mother, even though she was childless, for those of my age who came into the ANC. This is a woman who never reminded us of what contribution she gave to the people of South Africa. This is the woman who is chosen at the tipping scales, when this country is going forward, when we did not know, even after the long but not so long discussions, talks, negotiations, whether this country would hold. This is the woman who is given the responsibility to be the first Speaker of a democratically elected National Assembly of South Africa. This is a woman who leads a house under the government of national unity, with the first Deputy Speaker of this country at that point being Undate Ranshot. We never picked up any tensions between Ranshot and the Speaker. We had a relationship of the Speaker, the Speakerage, which led. This is a woman who pushes us who were younger than her. I don't know about you, Osnaliti, but I was pushed into rules, I was pushed into finance, because as she went through my background, she had realized I had read some of these things. This is a woman who, as I said, has issues with her background, but is motherly enough to know that unless you push and you push for women, nothing is going to happen. Now, the ANC Women's League at a particular point, not the league, the women's section, correction, convenes all women from all political hues of this country in Amsterdam, 1989, to the Malibongwe Conference. It is in that conference that we did not see many of our white counterparts, but we saw many of our black counterparts under the flag of the then National Party. It is at that particular state when some of us are freshly out of jail and agitating for war, because we have been hurt, we've been tortured, we have not seen our children, we have been stripped of all humanity, we have given birth under the glare of little boys who were being taught to be police. This is the woman, when we arrive at Malibongwe, furious, who comes us down and organizes counseling for us, because she reasons that angry people would not be able to deliver a stable South Africa. This is a woman who helps us marshal, because of our hatred of the South African Defence Force and the police then, who says, but you shall have something that is pro-people, that is residing with people, that does not have the same aggressive stance against its own populace. And therefore you must have a police. And that is why we came out, Minister Cele, it was at the Malibongwe conference where we firmed up the ANC position to have a police service in this country. It was at that conference where we looked at the armed forces and we said, never again are we going to allow the soldiers to kill their own. It is a Frene Ginwala who becomes the speaker, who has to set up the first committees of this house. It is a Frene Ginwala who is called in from time to time when a Thandi Modise in the Joint Standing Committee of Defense or Tony Yengen in the Joint Standing Committee of Defense take on the likes of General Merem because we do not agree. It is a Frene Ginwala who, if you remember, we were a beautiful motley of all hues in Parliament at that point, from all the extremes, from the Bantu stance and from the progressive, we were all there. Who says, and I, as speaker, shall have a program which will reflect the voice of people. It is Frene Ginwala who deals with the arms deal fallout. Very quietly, very calmly, sets up a mechanism which did not have this parliament falling apart, which reasonably got access to that report and read. It is again a Frene Ginwala who is Speaker of the National Assembly who deals with the Meyering report and its possible fallout, and holds the Swandiland in her hand and does not allow us to deteriorate to the point where that report was trying to push us to. It is a Frene Ginwala who helps the two houses, especially the National Council of Provinces, to become what it is from the old house. It is under her leadership as the head of the third arm of state where the recommendations are made to relook at the current NCOP, to relook at its representativity, its size, to relook at its ability to deal with all the issues of the Section 139, 154, and Section 100. So standing here, I feel very bad that we cannot say hamba kahle Frene. As far as the NCOP is concerned, we have delivered, because we have not delivered. It is a Frene Ginwala amongst the giants of the ANC, Bo Mashope, Bo Adelaide Tambo, at the ANC conference, who starts Murusu of the 30% representation within the ANC. It is a conference that does not give the ANC women what they need. But it is a small caucus, Comrade Speaker, that sits down and says, but we are not letting go. And who is the big agitator? Frene Ginwala, who says, you can go and see Madiba and Owar. We're not yet at the elections. And yes, the women of the ANC threatened, cajoled, blackmailed, if you like. And we said, we are the women of South Africa. Because remember, at that point, that National Women's Coalition, there was no elections there. There was a Frene Ginwala who was the chairperson of the National Coalition. There was a young woman, very religious, very beautiful, Tokom Sani, who was the chairperson of the National Coalition. And it was deliberate. An older woman and a younger woman put together, because what we realized was that the charter that we had of the rights of women had always in this country been determined, channeled by the black women and the progressive few whites and Indians and coloreds. And we wanted a charter that came out of the South African women. That charter today is actually the cornerstone. And I hear a lot of people who don't like us saying this and that. That charter came out of the villages, towns, and cities. It came out of the women of this country, black and white, rich and poor. So for me, you cannot give any praise to anybody but to those who guided us. The negotiations. Speaker, I always remind people that there was a day when we warned that we would close off the trade center if the other negotiating parties were not bringing women to the table. Frene did not need to agree. The ANC had women representing, but we still signed over. Because it was important to bring the voices of women from every political corner of this country. It wasn't that when she became speaker, she had it easy. You know, from...
We're in trouble in terms of time.
Okay, from Tambolenyoka to the guitar strings of Ferguson, to the young women who were lactating and nursing at that time, the demand for toilet spaces and respect in this parliament was thrown at Frene Ginwala. So she was graceful, she pushed us everywhere. The UN, the United Nations, the AU, all the fighting forces in this country knew that anthem of the ANC Women's League, Malibongwe.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Please allow me at this point to state that the presiding officers of Parliament associate themselves with the sentiments expressed by the members. I now urge you to please rise and observe a moment of silence in memory of Dr. Frene Ginwala. Thank you very much. Please take your seat. An announcement, honorable members. The condolence books will be available at the back of the chamber immediately after this joint sitting for members to sign. The period of signing the books will be extended to Thursday, the 16th of February, 2023. And a special bound copy of members' contributions today will be sent to the family to convey the sentiments expressed by Parliament. That, honorable members, concludes the tributes, and the joint sitting is now adjourned. It was